The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. There was a wedding at Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus and his disciples were also invited to the wedding. When the wine ran short, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, how does your concern affect me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servers, "Do whatever he tells you." Now there were 6 stone water jars there for Jewish ceremonial washings, each holding 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus told them, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Draw some out now and take it to the headwaiter." So they took it. And when the headwaiter tasted the water that had become wine, without knowing where it came from, although the servers who had drawn the water knew, the headwaiter called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves good wine, and then when people have drunk freely, an inferior one. But you have kept the good wine until now." Jesus did this at the beginning of his signs at Cana in Galilee, and so revealed his glory, and the disciples began to believe in him. The Gospel of the Lord. The other day I was walking past the green St. Vincent de Paul box outside in the parking lot next to the garage, and I found a $10 bill on the ground. I was going to throw it into the Vincent de Paul box, but then I thought, it's just going to get mixed in with all the clothes. So I thought, what would Jesus do? Well, I turned it into wine, a bottle of wine. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the Mass, the arrangement there is an example. Actually, a friend of mine from St. Agnes in Rockville made a donation for something special, something tangible for Curate to do for Jubilee year 2025 that began just 19 days ago. And he donated wine for the Masses today at Curate. So at the end of the Mass today, a small bottle of wine will be given to the adults, one for each family, to connect with this first miracle of Jesus. You know, we only hear this iconic gospel story once every 3 years on the second Sunday of the year. This is one of the 3 epiphany stories of Jesus' early life. The epiphany of the Magi, the wise men, 2 weeks ago, the baptism of the Lord last Sunday, and the first miracle of Jesus at Cana today. So the Gospel of John, interestingly, doesn't have any description of, or analysis or explanation of Jesus' birth. It begins with the prologue. There's no nativity scene as there is in Matthew and Luke. Some scholars think that this passage that we hear today is the nativity, as it were, chapter 2 of John, the nativity, the birth, the beginning of Jesus' ministry. And like the birthing itself, it is his mother. It is Mary who is pushing him, you might say, pushing him out on the stage. I can't help but wonder if Jesus and his disciples were invited to this wedding because of his mother. She seems to be friendly with the family, and maybe she's a relative, and obviously she cares about the embarrassment that running out of wine would cause. That could be why Mary expresses her concern to Jesus. And it's interesting, there are only 9 words of Mary, total, 9 words of Mary in the entire Gospel of St. John. They have no wine, 4 words, they have no wine, and do whatever he tells you, 5 words, to the waiters. She finds Jesus And she makes this announcement, and he says, "My hour has not yet come. What does this concern have to do for me?" So as I think about that, I think about many excuses that I used with my mother growing up. Don't try to use that excuse with most mothers. It doesn't work. She got his attention. A cajoling mother gets her point across. What an embarrassment for the families. Perhaps Mary also realized that Jesus and the disciples and those tagging along with the whole group that maybe surprised the wedding, the couple, that's the reason why they ran out of wine. Who knows? But the miracle story isn't really about a wedding, even though it's used at many nuptial masses. The subject isn't the wedding or the party. We have no idea who the newlyweds were. The story, though, is about life. Two people are supposed to be enjoying the happiest day of their lives with their friends, and the wine runs out. The party might have been ending as a result of that. That's not just an embarrassment, but it could seem to be a terrible omen. If there was too little wine at the wedding, what else will be lacking in the marriage? Yesterday, I had a nuptial mass here for one of my nieces, a cure of ours, followed by a reception. I went to the reception. I hate receptions. I never go, but I had to because it was family. Uh, they didn't run out of wine, and they didn't run out of food, but I wish somebody pulled the plug on the music. It was so loud, distracting. I couldn't wait to get out of there. And I left early, even when my family was there. Nevertheless, the story, though, today in the gospel isn't really about newlyweds, but it's really about Mary. And it's really about the woman who taught Jesus not only how to pray, but how to implement prayer by action. Do something. She wouldn't just sit back and watch the feast or watch life fizzle away. Representing her people, representing her needy world, representing life for us, she simply told the servants to do what Jesus told them to do, fill the jars with water, knowing that when it happened, well, all would be well. So St. John is framing this incident as a symbolic depiction of God's people who have run out of joy and hope and meaning, and at the same time should or must do something. Isn't that the message that Dr. Martin Luther King heard and reacted to some 50 plus years ago? His do something changed our nation. Martin Luther King picked up Mary's theme in his book entitled Why We Can't Wait. Why We Can't Wait. Obviously, Jesus wanted to wait, but Mary pushes him, births him onto the scene. So Martin Luther King wrote, time itself is neutral. Time is neutral. It can be used destructively or constructively. Like Mary telling the servants to obey Jesus, Dr. Martin Luther King said, human progress never rolls in on the wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts of people willing to be co-workers with God, as you see some of his writings on the banner by the organ there. So theologically, at least for St. John, Jesus waited for the hour when Mary would birth his ministry. God sends Mary and Jesus and the apostles and 2,000 years worth of disciples, Dr. King and each of us, to do something to change circumstances in the world, in our lives, in our family, in our church, positively. Stirred by the urgent prayer and the demand of Mary to do something, we too are invited to be open, to be moved to do something new and creative and beautiful for the world. But what to do? Well, as St. Paul tells us in that second reading today from Corinthians that Anthony read so beautifully, there are different gifts and services, but each person has a manifestation of the Spirit for some benefit, some work, some service, some ministry. Every one of us can do something to change some negative circumstances, some deprivations in our lives, not just being without wine, but being without hope and a positive perspective on life. When we look at the conditions of the world, we can sometimes feel powerless. But the message is do something. something good for the little corner of our world, perhaps closest to us, be it the classroom, the boardroom, the reception room, or whatever space, environment we find ourselves in. Even Jesus, very interestingly, even Jesus tried to think of an excuse momentarily. And sometimes we might think, well, my time hasn't come yet. Or when we get old, we might say, well, my time is just about finished. Necessary changes can't wait for the right time, because when it comes to reform, that time never arrives. The time is always now. Now to do whatever we can, as Mary encourages. So as we enter into a new year, Mary of Nazareth, the persistent guest at Cana, urges us to believe that the hour has come. It's very interesting and perhaps a symbolic confluence that the inauguration of the president falls on Martin Luther King Day as we hear the miracle at Cana. The miracle at Cana reminds us that Jesus has the power to transform not only water into wine, but also to transform our lives in the world, and that we each play a part of that in the world, in our country, in our families, in our church. Dr. King's legacy reminds us that this transformation requires courage and perseverance and faith. In a time when we're constantly bombarded with bad news, we're called to interrupt the cycle of that bad news and bring good news, bring new wine, new hope, and the good news of the gospel. So as we stand at this crossroads in our nation's history, let us trust in God's ability, with our cooperation, to bring about renewal, reconciliation. Let us commit ourselves to being instruments of His peace, working for justice, working for unity, working for a world where people can flourish. And we will accomplish this as a nation if we simply try to listen to the last words of the gospel: do whatever He tells us.